All right, good morning. And it is early here today, and it feels earlier because our clocks shifted forward last week, and that always takes a while to adapt. That isn't what I'm going to talk about today, but um, when those clocks shift, no matter which way, forward or back, it it seems to take an unrealistic amount of time for me to get used to it. Um, but it's been a week, and so I'm used to it. Uh, I just wish we didn't do it. PRISMATHEON. So this is a project that I've started to use as an umbrella for all kinds of things that I've been talking and writing about for a long time. Uh, the specifics of this project, I'm going to talk a little bit about it. I did just put a video up a few days ago, last week, about PRISMATHEON, the details of it. So go check that out. But I'll talk a little bit about what this particular project is. But today I want to talk more generally about what it is to create art that has this kind of scale, this kind of scope, right? Because if you remember from that video, PRISMATHEON started as a conversation. Actually, it was a conversation I was having with my daughter. My daughter is a research analyst at a at a center. I was trying to think of the right word there for a second. That um, focuses on energy policy and associated climate impact. You know, the very interesting, broad set of questions. Uh, so she's always keeping me up on the latest thinking, and I'm all in on geoengineering, right? That a, a reasonable response um, to concerns about sort of radically changing climate would be to introduce large interventions into the atmosphere or the planet that direct the climate the way that we want it to. Now, of course, that raises all kinds of questions about who decides what it is that we want. All of those are necessary conversations. But I'm particularly intrigued by the idea of atmospheric mirrors that reflect the sunlight back out, right? Uh, and what PRISMATHEON is a thought experiment that would say, well, what if we were to actually move ahead with that? What are the questions we need to ask and answer about the ethics of it, the governance of it, who controls where it gets deployed, and what the impact is? But I'm pretty convinced that, I mean, our entire presence on the Earth is geoengineering. From the very first moments of what we would recognize as human culture, we have shaped the planet. Who was I reading? Robert Macfarlane. I think he's Scottish. Uh, Forgive me if he's not Scottish. He's British of some kind. I think maybe he lives in Scotland. He writes about the landscape and nature, and our interaction with it. I'll do a video on Robert Macfarlane and his writing. But I read one of his books, and it was basically there is no untouched area, and that can either be good or bad. And when it's unthinking, it's not good, right? When you go down into the deep trenches in the ocean and there's a Coke bottle, that's not good, right? But if you look up at the atmosphere and there's a cloud of micro prismatic mirrors that are mitigating the impact of climate change and at the same time creating a beautiful sort of aurora that we're able to control with land-based lasers. So that's the premise of Prismatheon. It's an intervention, and it's an intervention that's deliberate and is shaped by the science of climate geoengineering and by aesthetics. And I do think of it as an intervention, almost as an inoculation or like a vaccine, because this is a culture, right? This is how we think about things, and that's a system, and a system can be hacked. And an artistic intervention on this scale is a system hack of how we think about things and how we interact and how we choose to behave. And when I use that word intervention, I'm as influenced as anything by Guy Debord, the French writer, philosopher, the situationist, from whence we get a lot of what we consider psychogeography. So Debord and his situationists would say that we interact with the city, the urban landscape, often based on need or the imperatives of commerce. But what if you were to create an algorithm that directed your movement through the city by some other artificial but aesthetic purpose? So here's a simple psychogeographic algorithm. Go outside your door and always turn left, but only turn left every 3 times you could turn left. And so now you're moving through the space, through the city, with a directive that has nothing to do with going to buy a pair of shoes or picking up a cup of coffee. The system has been hacked, right? And that even one individual interacting in this way changes the overall nature of our experience. With space, outer space, well, I mean, even that word demands some thought, right? What do we mean by outer space? Do we mean what? Do we mean the furthest reaches of our atmosphere? At what point does space begin and Earth end? That interstitial region is interesting. But let's say that space here means orbit, right? Where you are no longer constrained by gravity. Okay, so we are using that space commercially. We're using it for the military. And there are a few artistic engagements with space. My friend, my mentor, Lowry Burgess, was a space artist. He created objects that were aesthetically charged by the fact that they had been into space. One of his works was on a space shuttle. And so as it was activated by the fact that it had experienced zero gravity. A few years ago, I met Frank Pietronegro, who also works with zero gravity and interesting, beautiful work, kind of recreating that sense of zero gravity in airplanes that are sort of radically oscillating so that as they descend, you're floating. It's not truly zero gravity, but the effect is the same. So what happens if you paint in those kinds of scenarios? I'm thinking of a piece more recently where a geostationary satellite that's visible from the Earth is illuminated and we can see it. I think these are very beautiful and different ways of thinking about how we interact with space. And until we could go there, space was a sacred canvas. And it has to maintain that even now that we can get in a tube and shoot ourselves up into the atmosphere, into space. Exploration is not an excuse for exploitation. Oh, that's good, isn't it? Exploration is not an excuse for exploitation. And we need to maintain the sense of spaciousness. Literally, space, spaciousness. The mind requires this as we become constrained on the earth. And if we are also losing the view above us, you know, one of the worst things I think that we do is keep lights on all the time. I realized that I've never seen a truly dark night sky. I've never been in a place where there are no lights, and not often have I been in a place where there are low enough lights that you can really see the Milky Way. I mean, just think what it would have been like not even that long ago, where you could look at Manhattan and also see the Milky Way. These are experiences that we don't have available to us anymore, and I think it's a lack. So when I say that PRISMATHEON is an umbrella project, there's other ideas that form underneath this: the importance of dark sky, the importance of the sacred, and specifically the liturgical. Let us reinvest space with some liturgy. I think that when I talk about this thought experiment of PRISMATHEON, which literally are tiny little prisms in space that can be controlled for a geoengineering effect, but then also can be activated by land-based lasers so we can see a liturgical display. That's the same tradition as Gothic cathedrals, as the building of these immense structures that point to the sky. You know, whatever else they are, a cathedral is a finely tuned instrument that takes human mentation, right, human thinking, and sends it up. And that's true. It was true 1,000 years ago when they were being built, and it's true today. We may be different. I have a very different life than a 12th century Norman serf, peasant, but not that different. We still need the sense of the liturgically infused space readily available to us. And that's in addition to the other teachings and liturgies that we need, whether that's a meditative practice, whether it's a prayerful practice in the Christian tradition. These are all things that are made stronger. There's a loop between this work in the explicitly aesthetic space and in the more immediate personal, religious, or spiritual or meditation practice. As one develops, so does the other, and as that becomes more sustainable or approachable, it feeds back into the original source. PRISMATHEON is a thought experiment, right? Like I'm not positioned to work with NASA or with the European Space Agency or with the United Nations. But frankly, I don't know if the institutions exist on the planet to the point where we could have the kind of balanced discussion so that the geoengineering side of this is truly beneficial on a global scale, because it cannot be done if that isn't the case. So I recognize that. I recognize that for the aesthetics and the geoengineering of the umbrella project of Prismathion to take effect, there needs to be an enlivening of a different form of perhaps federated global government. Right? This cannot be something that individuals in the United States operate on. With that in mind, though, I do think that talking about it and using the idea to shape smaller projects or different kinds of conversations is as necessary as building a pyramid. There you go. Let's leave it that way. We want to maintain, recreate where necessary, a sense of meaning, a sense of reverence. And that will only happen when there's a shared sense of wonder that really is part of a human experience, right? The more I talk about it, the more I realize that the thought experiment itself is just absurd. And yet, it ties together so many different interesting, valuable threads that I have no choice but to keep talking about it. So, anyway, let me know what you all think. If you have questions or suggestions, or if you happen to have a few extra billion lying around, because that will always get people's attention as well, won't it? So, anyway, keep your wits about you. Tomorrow, Thursday, will be meditation Q&A. I should have said this at the beginning of the video. Thursdays I'm going to spend on the technique and the specific practices of meditation, because I think that that's a necessary part of all of this work as well.